rock. Hey, he goes, I said, "Mom, that little pitch right on top of the Jeep, it'll probably go just fine." And he goes, "You're funny." Well, buddy, I don't know what to tell you. That's right.
I'm just right.
Oh my, he's
public hearing for commercial wind energy proposed amendments to order.
Louder.
We're calling the Monday, July 9th, 2018 public hearing for the site plan review ordinance proposed amendments to order. Can everybody stand and please we'll do the pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you everybody for coming. We're going to go over a brief public hearing rules and procedures for tonight's meeting. This meeting is being recorded in order to accurately capture this proceeding. If you decide to speak at this public hearing, please identify yourself and your place of residence for the record prior to asking your question concerning the proposed changes. Comments or questions will be restricted to only the issues for the public hearing is being held, which is the proposed changes, additions, and amendments to the current commercial facilities ordinance. Comments pertaining to any other area concerning commercial wind facilities can be submitted to the town office. Board rules allow each member of the public to speak for 5 minutes, which will also include, if you ask a question, it will also include the answer from any one of the members from the Ordinance Review Committee. The public hearing will be adjourned if the audience attending the public hearing cannot follow this rule. Cell phones and pagers. If anybody has a cell phone or pager, please turn it off, just so we don't get interrupted. Okay? So that's the public hearing rules and procedures. So what we're here to do tonight is to have questions brought to everyone here. And if anybody has a question concerning the changes to the ordinance, please raise your hand will acknowledge you, ask you questions. Kim has a remote. I'm sorry, Joelle has the remote microphone. And ask your question, and then we'll ask which one of the committee members would like to answer it. So, who would like to go first? Betsy.
And I'll need the remote. I'd like to make a motion that, is this echoing back and forth?
Good.
Okay. Make a motion that somebody, whether it's you, Dennis, or someone else, just explain what the committee has been doing the last 18 months and why. And also if one of the members of the committee who worked on the justifications could speak for a moment about how they justified what they found. I'd like to make that motion.
I will second that motion.
Is there any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Larry, you want to take a, let's do a roll call first so that people in the audience know who's who. Jim, you want to start?
Kevin St. Germain, committee member and planning board member.
Eagle Mill, Secretary of Planning Board.
Brad Payne, I'm on the ordinance committee and the planning board.
Larry Molina, I'm the chair of the ordinance committee.
Jesse Frederickson, I'm a member of this ordinance committee.
Tyler Bennett, I'm an ordinance review committee member and a planning board member.
Becky Seacrest, I'm an ordinance review committee member and an alternate planning board member.
And I'm Dennis Doyon, and I was on the ordinance review committee, and I'm also chairman of the Greenwood Planning Board. Larry, do you want to?
Thank you, Dennis. Ladies and gentlemen, as the chair of the ordinance review committee, many of you in this room have come to our meetings, and you know full well that what we did deliberately and with a lot of thought and a lot of reading. We reviewed many documents, and I want to thank the members of my committee who have done a lot of extra work and spent a lot of time coming to the conclusions that we came to. One point was, I know we started talking in the early stages about the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that would be relatively easy to deal with, and that was how to deal with complaints and how to deal with what to do with the wind towers once the wind towers were no longer of any use to anybody. Get rid of them, get the earth back to what it was before. And so we spent a few meetings on that, and then Jessie started to do some research on how to deal with complaints, and she found out an awful lot of interesting stuff, and we spent another few meetings on that. And thank God we did, because I feel we have a very good ordinance change with respect to how to field complaints. And complaints now get felt or dealt with through the town. And why do we do that? We did that because now we have historical capability. You can go back and research, because the town has direct rules to follow with respect to information that is public information, and they have to store it, and it has to be available to the public. And the company is required to respond in a certain amount of time, et cetera, et cetera. So we did spend a lot of time on that. And then we got into dealing with the consultants on audio and infrasound. And those two areas were extremely important to us and to the community at large. And we had two of them. The first one and the second one were pretty much compatible as far as what they said. And both of those meetings, my understanding, I wasn't at the first one, but the second one, both of those meetings were very well attended. And those folks did a credible job of telling us what the story was with respect to sound and how it's transmitted and decibel levels and some of the technical stuff. And then we also heard from the DEP and some of the things that they're doing. And we also heard, who's the other person?
Bob
Becky?
Elliott.
Who?
Bob Elliott came in for the World Health Organization.
Who?
Bob Elliott.
Bob Elliott.
Right, but who was the other guy from the state?
Mark Ferguson?
Mark Bergeron,
And who's he?
DEP.
But there was another guy too.
No, there was only one DEP guy.
I know, but there was another fellow at that same
He was
meeting.
one of the audio. One of the audio.
Who's the audio?
Yeah.
Oh, was?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, anyway, we had a lot of outside help from other sources. And through all of this, the public was invited. This was all open meetings. We made an effort to be transparent. We made the effort to do due diligence and do it well. And then when all that was done, made a decision. And here we are today because we finally got everything across the finish line. It took a long time. We reviewed at length several meetings about property value and health issues. And we decided that those two were so difficult to put into words to make them understandable and defensible with respect to the law. We just felt that that was going to be too difficult to handle. And it's an area that can be revisited if necessary. And so we are where we are, and what you see before you is the result of a whole bunch of work on the committee. I think the height and the setbacks, audio levels, infrasound levels, etc., they were voted on, I think it was 6-3. So that is an overview of where we're at tonight. This is the next to last leg in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, question on any of the proposed changes or amendments to the existing ordinance. Dr. Glass.
Thank you. Actually, this isn't a question, but a comment from Larry. My name is Jonathan Glass. I live on Twitchell Pond, directly across from where these things are proposed to be built. My family's been there for 50 years. I just want to say that this committee has done an extraordinarily thorough and excellent job. I both participated and attended many of the meetings last summer. I've been following all of the minutes that came by email from Kim. Thank you very much. And the document that's been put together, I think, is complete, very detailed, and I think meets the standards of what we should expect of this committee. So, Larry and the rest of the committee, thank you for doing that. And I just want to say that I think we should support what they've been put together.
All right, thank you. Dr. Glass, no disrespect. We need to keep the questions pertaining to the changes to the ordinance. Okay? The comments or questions as they pertain to the changes of the ordinance. That's the way the lawyer had advised us to do it, and it's the way the select board. Mr. Jordan, is that not correct?
I don't remember the discussion on that. I mean,
Anybody have? Go ahead.
Dwight Mills, Greenwood, Maine. Are you going to go through the proposed changes one by one tonight? I mean, we may have a question come up during the discussion. I guess the whole thing is being run differently than I had expected. I brought a whole list of things to say, and I won't be able to say any of it because you've shut us up pretty much. But I might have a question or two about this process if the process takes place.
Tyler, do you want to...
And I would have... I don't need that thing.
Just yell at us.
I would have one question, and that is, if the planning board has done or is doing anything about enforcement on what's under development. The company is advertising in the paper that they're wind farm is under development right now. And I understand they don't have a permit.
There's been no application to the planning board, so.
And there's no enforcement in progress.
Can I see that? Okay.
There's been no application, and unless there's that's brought as far as work being done to the attention of the code enforcement officer, that's not really a planning board, it's not a planning board deal.
So if somebody makes a complaint to the town,
It goes to the code enforcement officer.
thanks.
Can you show me that?
Larry, you want to just read through a few of them, or what? What do you want to do?
Well, you can do it, Dennis, if you like.
Okay. We'll go through, why don't we go through the major ones that are done? Okay. One change that's been made, these are additions to, does everybody have this document, which is an ordinance amending the Town of Greenwood Site Plan Review Ordinance? Does everybody have this document? There are lots of copies available.
Dennis, what is the date on?
The date is revised June 7, 2018. You're welcome. Okay? All right, we'll start right on page 2, and we'll go through, let's start right on section C1. And so what is, anything that has a line drawn through it is what is being deleted from the ordinance. Anything that is underlined is what the proposed amendment is. Okay, so on section C1, and they're also highlighted in bold, to be impacted, any scenic resource to be impacted by the CWEF, historic sites within, it was 1 mile, it's changed to 1,000 feet of any disturbed area. And then they're stricken out the proposed development facility site. It says associated with the CWEF. So it went from 1 mile to 1,000 feet. Do we want to ask questions as we go through it, or do we want to ask questions afterwards?
As we go through it.
Okay. Does anybody have a question on that change? All right, seeing none. The next change, hi.
Hi, what's the definition of
Can you
scenic?
state your name, please?
Okay. Monica Burke, Greenwood.
Yep.
Okay. What exactly is a definition of scenic resource?
Do we have the definition? I don't have the definition. Do we have a definition? There's a whole list of scenic resources at the town hall. Okay. All right, on page 3. It's a preliminary decommissioning plan that includes the following. So basically, when any CWEF is going to be decommissioned, these were the following that were added. It says methods to remove all parts of the CWEF, including foundations, and how they will be disposed of. Areas and methods to restore disturbed land areas, estimated time period, months to complete decommissioning, and estimated cost of decommissioning in accordance with section 17-701.3-4. So that basically, that's all got to do with when it's time, how they come down. Any questions on that? Go ahead, Mr. Miller.
I guess the only question is do we have the money up front for this? If they fold up and go out of business?
You want to handle, I mean, I know the answer. You want to handle that?
I can take care of that. Yes, the engineer on a, is it 2-year basis? We change it to 2 or do it? Yes. On a 2-year basis, has to review what the costs involved to do that are, and a percentage of that cost has to be in the bank. in a bond or some other form of monetary security for the town. And yes, the money is available.
Thank you. All right.
What percent, when you say a percentage, you talking 5%, 20%?
I think it was it started at 100 and it declined as the facility aged.
Would they
Over
go
a
together
20-year period.
way?
And it bottomed out at about 50% of the total.
Thank you.
There's another factor involved, and it was kind of complicated. We went through it all, and it was with respect to how much the residual value was to the company.
Do you, in the facts and findings rationale, there's the answer?
Paul?
Decommissioning and abandonment section?
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, still on page 3, amended sections under additional information for commercial wind energy facilities as follows. Audible sound and infrasound levels analysis prepared by a qualified engineer. Okay, so it doesn't mean that the company says, here it is, it has to be provided by a qualified engineer. All right. In the next section, this is under...
I have a question.
Yeah.
Who pays for that engineer?
That would be the CWEF. The
So
commercial
company?
wind.
The company, yes.
It could be whatever, let's just refer to the CWEF, to the commercial wind energy facility. Whoever is proposing it would be responsible for those costs.
So is it that a conflict of interest?
No, because the planning board can pick their own engineer. It doesn't have to be an engineer that's remember that during the planning board process, the planning board can ask for anything, any additional information, support, or whatever that they feel is necessary during the whole planning process. So the town is not going to be responsible for that, for those costs. Let's go. Description 1. Okay, the next large change to this was on the bottom. I don't know if you call it large or not, but it was to make it consistent throughout the ordinance. It was on the bottom of page 3. To noise, it says the following uses and activities shall be exempt from the sound pressure level regulations. Noise created by construction and temporary maintenance activities. It was changed from 6:30 a.m. it went to 7 a.m. and then from 8 p.m. it went to 7 p.m. So during that construction period, it's 7 to 7. You get 12 hours, and that's it. Question? The next big one, on the bottom of page 4, under control of noise, it says the town of Greenwood finds that noise, both audible sound and infrasound, from a CWEF is unique from their commercial type development. These findings are based on information provided at a public meeting by Mike Betharian, who was the principal consultant and the acoustical engineer. These professionals provided scenic data and opinion of the effects of the noise from the CWF on human health problems and recommended standards to minimize such noise. Health problems from the CW from the wind turbine noise may include loss of well-being, cognitive ability, and stress, sleep disorders, interruption, deprivation, and motion sickness, nausea, headaches, vertigo. Considerations in the recommended standards include rural nature of Greenwood rather than the standards employed by more urban areas. So when this acoustical engineer came, these were his findings that he based to the ordinance review committee.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Chris Powers, Greenwood Road. My question is...
Stand up and yell.
Yeah, just stand up and yell.
Sorry about that, folks.
Thanks, Chris.
Everybody have the hearing back? My question is, isn't it true that these protections that we're reading right now don't take effect unless we vote for this ordinance. In other words, we're not protected from these sound levels, the things that we've mentioned.
That's true. I'd also like to mention that we also had Stephen Ambrose come, and the noise levels that we ended up adopting were based on the World Health Organization standards. We're based on the World Health Organization standards for what's an allowable sound level for rural areas and residencies worldwide. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? All right. On page 5, under audible sound limits. The standards were 45 dBA, an ambient sound level at a protected location is equal to or less. Now, the protected location is not somebody's home. The protected location is the boundary between the development and the closest landowner. So whatever that property line is, the boundary level is basically a property line, is what that is. So it went from 45 dBA to 35 dBA, and anything that's in a protected location is equal to or less than, it was 35 and is now 25. Any questions on that so far? Okay, just for a reference, so how do we reference 25 dBA?
30 dBA is a whisper.
Okay. So 30 dBA is a whisper. We were told by Mike Betharian that in rural Greenwood, that at night, with no wind between the hours of, what, midnight and 4 or something like that, the decibel level was 24, is what his comparison was.
Monica Burt, was that in the summertime or the wintertime?
He did not.
Where was that in town?
I don't think he differentiated.
It's
did he?
quieter in the winter because of the way
Okay.
it had to do with humidity and the snow. I guess it's just quieter ambient in the winter.
Okay, 'cause I grew up in Newry,
Yeah.
and the snow guns are much more than that. I'll tell you that.
Oh, yeah.
So this would take away a lot of business.
I'm looking up something.
Okay.
Can I?
Go ahead.
Can I? Because I heard what you said about it would take away business. Well, it would. These changes apply to only commercial wind facility, CWA, whatever it is. It doesn't apply to snowmaking. It doesn't apply to any lawn mowing. It doesn't apply to anything like that. It's specific to wind towers and commercial wind development.
It's also exponential, so 35 is considerably louder than 25, and 45 is exponentially louder than. Does that make sense?
Okay? Okay. All right, you're welcome. On the bottom of page 5, there was a section in there for short duration repetitive sounds, where there was going to be an allowable limit in addition to what they were going to be of 5 dBA. That is now gone. So there is no allowable limits, anything extra other than what is on the standards. We've kind of already reviewed the sound and construction of the facility from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So basically, what this is saying, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., any sound level over 25 dBA is not allowable. Anybody have a question on that? Okay. And then there are, and these came from, I believe, Mike Betharian, did they not, Larry? As far as the duration of activity, the hourly sound levels at a 12-hour, 8, 6, 4, I think those all came from John Betharian that the committee adopted. Okay. Page 7, on the technical information. It says a description of, and it used to say proposed major sound control measures, and it now says and location of continuous noise monitoring systems that shall include the latest technology on sensors. So, that was presented to the board, correct me if I'm wrong, Lee, but that was presented to the committee to adopt so that you just didn't, because the town of Greenwood really doesn't have any sort of monitoring device, nor do I think the town want to purchase or train somebody for that. So this was put in there so that this would be performed as part of the application process or thereafter once the facility, if the facility was ever completed. Okay. Let's go to page 8, please. Okay, on section 4F, where it says measurements period shall be avoided when the local wind speed exceeds 12 miles an hour and/or precipitation would affect the measurement results. What was also added into there, that was left in there, what was also added is wind speeds are the ones at which the wind turbine is shown to produce the highest sound levels on vendor testing. So what we were told by one of the audiologists was that as the wind increases, it masks the sound, so you may not get a true reading of what that level is, but there are certain levels where you can definitely identify where it's the highest. Is that correct, Lynn?
I believe that's correct.
That's the way it was presented to us. Okay. Under infrasound, does everybody know what infrasound is? Okay, infrasound is sounds you can't hear. Okay, it can be measured, but the human ear can't hear it, is the way it was described to us.
You feel it.
Yes, but I'm just saying, as far as...
Your ear perceives the sound, and then it routes to a different, it does affect you, though, and you can look it up on how infrasound affects the ear, and it's wired into your brain, and what that does.
So under infrasound 5A, that is all new language. No wind turbine shall produce an infrasound pressure level which is 6 dB higher than the background infrasound pressure levels at the primary blade pass frequency and blade pass frequency harmonics. Please do not...
Affecting me. I can't sleep. It's bothering me and my dog. So I have to go to this committee and have them...
The committee's work is done.
Not this committee, I'm sorry, to another enforcement committee to say, this is really bothering me, what are we going to do about it? So I'm asking them what the process is. Do they shut them down that day until I'm proven right or wrong? Or do I just have to deal with it until they tell me to sit down and be quiet?
So the procedure basically would be to fill out where the ordinance now will have a complaint section of it and how that's handled, which I think we'll get to a little bit later on, and then it would go to the code enforcement officer for action from there. But there are time limits that any company has to respond to answer and either legitimize it or not.
And just to follow up, I mean, I respect the fact that they wrote these in there because I think it's important that we have these boundaries that, you know, they have to meet, but I just would assume they don't put them up in the first place.
Okay. All persons conduct, let's go to the...
Dennis, can I piggyback on that?
Yes, I'm sorry.
I don't mean to delay it anymore, but...
Who are you?
From Flutton. I just
Where
bought
are
a
you from?
house that's on Twitchell
Okay.
Mountain. And so I think we're the closest house to the turbines, from what I understand in the maps and so forth. But I just want to piggyback on that question now, because I know you're going to talk about the complaints and so forth later, but I have a feeling that if it gets voted down and those towers go up, it's going to be my wife who is the first complaint, because she already doesn't sleep well. And so it seems to me like the recommendations, like the WHO that you mentioned, and these kinds of things are very sound, the 1 mile and so forth, but all of that relates to if the ordinance is passed or not, right?
Yeah.
So hypothetically, again, just to say, if Lori, my wife, does complain to the town, what I understand is that the only recompense is that we would sue the town. So just to follow up on that complaint story, let's say they go up and the infrasound, which we understand does impact the brain. I'm a physiologist too, by the way, and I wrote a letter about this to the committee. But let's say that all of that stuff does happen. One of us complains to the town. We sue the town. Now we're suing our neighbors. And we just moved into the area, so that's not a great thing, but is that correct in terms of what we would have to do?
You're saying if the ordinance does not pass and the towers go in,
And the towers go
then
up.
we're not then?
Yeah, and then we're impacted by infrasound, which we really don't understand too well physiologically, but there is a lot of studies that do talk about the things that you've described, even the mechanism of the brain. And so, if that does start to happen, do we sue the town of Greenwood? Is that what we have to do?
I think you sue the wind company in the town of Greenwood.
I was told that we don't sue the wind company, we sue the town.
Okay, maybe you sue our ordinance committee for that. No, I don't know, I'm not sure.
I'm not a lawyer, but that's the reality.
I'm not a lawyer.
You're a lawyer,
Anybody
right?
know?
No, I'm not a lawyer.
Anyway, does anybody know the answer to that?
No.
Why we have Kim?
Does anybody know the answer? I don't believe that there is an easy answer to that question, quite honestly. When you deal with the state regulations, okay, that's another thing that you could do is find out from the DEP what is available through that process. And one of the things I do know about the legal process is you need to do all the things that you can do before you get to suing anybody.
Yeah, we don't want to sue anybody.
No, but that's the point. You've got to go take every remedy that's available to you and try it. If it doesn't work,
so that's
now you get to the
a lot of
court.
stuff, right.
Exactly.
Try and do. Gotcha.
Exactly.
And infrasound travels through objects, through non-living
Absolutely.
It does, it goes into buildings, right? So that's why that section's in the ordinance where they will test in the building. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why there's that section, whether it's interior or exterior.
Yeah, Ed Rosenberg, I'm from Woodstock. I have property in Twitchell Pond. What we heard from Mark Bergeron, who's the Assistant Director of the DEP, and he's in charge of the licensing. When he came, he told all of us that if the town has a more restrictive standard than the state, that they will enforce whatever is the lower standard. So, the stricter standard.
Yeah.
So if we have the ordinance, we would have a stricter standard and they would enforce it. If we don't have the ordinance, then the 42 decibels that the state has would be what they would enforce.
And they don't address infrasound.
And they don't address infrasound. Right. But they, I think, will in the future be coming to that in this next generation of regulations. But I think that the important thing is by having the lower standard, the state will enforce that lower standard.
Stricter. Thank you.
Yeah. It doesn't matter whether it's these standards or anything that has to do with any town ordinance. If a town has an ordinance that's stricter than any state regulation, then the town ordinance is what applies.
But the state will enforce the town ordinance.
The state will,
Right.
Jane?
Jane Ryerson, my husband and I own property at Twitchell Pond. I'm confused when you talked about a mile, but yet on page 10 it talks about a mile, but on page 2 it talks about reducing a mile to 1,000 feet.
No.
So
Okay.
what are these two different things?
All right, the mile to 1,000 feet was strictly to a scenic resource. Okay,
It's
so it
only
might
to
be,
see it.
you know, it might be the ice skates. Okay, if that's labeled as a scenic resource, then a tower can't be within 1,000 feet of that.
Maggie's?
Okay.
Correct.
I don't, yeah, I mean, it depends on what's, you know, what's where, okay, what's identified as the town as a scenic resource. We'll get to page 10 as far as the mile, because if I try to answer that now, you're gonna be even more confused then. So do you understand what I'm saying as far as the 1,000 feet that's strictly to a scenic resource that's been identified by the town? Okay? All right.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Mary Ring. I'm on the Greenwood Road. Okay. Is there a list of scenic, or can we go to the town and ask that things be added as scenic?
It's in our comprehensive plan.
It is in there. But if we wanted something else, we could ask that it be added to it?
Yeah, I think that was our next step, is to regroup a comprehensive plan committee to update that list.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so that would be a whole revision of the entire comprehensive plan.
Okay.
Which if you think this one went a year. Wow, I don't mean to make light. All right, on page 8, measurement personnel qualifications, that was given to us by the presenter, Mike Betharian, and the committee adopted his recommendations as to what is a qualified, who is a qualified person to make measurements and who isn't, and the instrumentation and the measurements of procedures. So that goes page 8 and page 9. All of those came right from the acoustical engineer. Okay, so basically you have to have the right degrees and the right equipment, and I think that if I'm remembering Mike right, there's only 3 people in the entire United States that can measure infrasound at this point. So, okay. All right, here we go into some of the meat and potatoes of it, as Terry was saying, with the non-low hanging fruit. Height and setbacks, which is on page 10. What we had safety setbacks before, and it said height and setbacks now, it's combined. Before there was no, in the current ordinance, there is no height restriction in the current ordinance. Okay? The height now, the way it reads, is the maximum turbine height shall not exceed 250 feet as measured from the surface, which is the top of the tower base, to the highest point in any turbine rotor blade, measured at the highest arc of the blade, which is 250 feet. Okay? The setbacks are the minimum setback for any tower to a non-participating landowner's property line shall be a minimum of 1 mile measured horizontally per 100 feet of tower height. So that's where the mile and the 2.5 mile thing is. So if somebody builds a 100-foot tower, which I don't even know if there's one on the market, they have to be a mile away. If they build a 250-foot tower, then they have to be 2.5 miles away, and 250 feet is the maximum height. Question, yep.
So, okay, Ryerson. So, on this setback of 1 mile, why would you even have that in there if you have above that the turbine height shall not exceed 250? Why wouldn't you have a minimum of 2.5 miles?
The way the motion was made to the committee was that the first motion was that the tower height could not exceed 250 feet. That was the first part of the motion. Okay. The second part of the motion was for the setbacks. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm trying to remember. The setbacks was voted on that for every 100 feet of tower, you had to have a mile setback.
She's talking about scenic resource.
No, we were on scenic resources.
She's saying, why didn't we just say 2.5 miles? But we're saying, you know, if it's a 150-foot tower, we're still saying that, kind of.
We said, I'll tell you why we said that, because if technology should change so that 150-foot towers are usable, could be done on that. Technology changes and they could do something like that. So if they put up a 150-foot tower, it would still have to be 1.5 miles because we have that 100-foot. So if we limit it to 250, but somebody comes up with the technology where they can put up a 150-foot tower, it still has to be 1.5 miles. It's 1 mile per 100 feet of tower height. So does that answer your question, Jane?
I think I have one other thing to add to that. And I think the only reason we did them separately too and did these two numbers was because, sorry, we did these separately because also if there was ever an issue where like there was they could come in and drawing a blank on what the word is, a waiver. If there was ever a waiver on something, and let's say the tower height was able to be exceeded to 350, then they have to go 3.5 miles, which means going further than as the towers were to go up. So if they were to get a waiver on something or something changed, we still had kind of two ways to protect ourselves, not just combined into one.
Okay, let's go to page, does that answer everybody's question as far as height and setback? Okay, let's go to page 11, please. And this is where we get into, Jill, into the, and Mr., I can't remember your name. Mr. Lund, okay. As to where, as far as complaints go, okay. Basically, it tightens it up so that, if you read down through it, it says you have to complete the public inquiry form, okay, which will be on the town of Greenwood's website. All right. Upon the receipt of any public inquiry complaint, the town shall notify the inquiry and/or complaint to a public inquiry and/or complaint being that it has been received. Okay, and we went kind of round and round on this because I mean, if you send something by certified mail, you're going to be weeks getting even an acknowledgement that was received. So that is not in there. And then if you go to page 12, this is more of the meat and potatoes. It says responsibility to CWEF owner or operator. Within 72 hours, the owner operator's contact person that is responsible to respond to public inquiries and/or complaints shall provide a response to the town and the persons filing public inquiry and/or complaint in accordance with the approved public inquiry complaint response protocol. So they have to respond within 72 hours. And that's not 72 hours working days, 3 working days. What happens if somebody makes a complaint on Friday? Then if it's Friday evening, then it has to be acknowledged by Monday. It's 72 hours. So does that answer your?
Well, it does, and then I just wonder what happens for CWEF, because it seems to me that if the ordinance is passed.
Please stand up.
I'm sorry. So if the ordinance is passed, then it's no longer their responsibility. It's the town's responsibility, because the town has to pass the ordinance or not. If the town doesn't pass the ordinance, then it falls on the town to deal with the liability. Is there anybody who's an attorney or anything in here understand the legal?
Anybody want to admit they're an attorney here?
I mean, I came to a few of the meetings and I asked this before, and it was explained to me, I think by CWEF folks, who were doing a really nice job of demonstrating how it all works. That responsibility, if the ordinance is passed, then we're following these guidelines, and these guidelines would say what the CWEF folks need to do after they have followed up after 72 hours. What happens after that is my question.
So if you read down through in section 4, that's where it goes in. Within 1 week of the receipt, the town responds. If you want to read down through, that's where it responds. Where there's a week And then the town within 1 week shall forward to the owner-operator's contact person that is responsible to respond to public inquiries and/or complaints, the result of the assessment as identified above. So they basically have 1 week to identify if the complaint is valid or not, or...
And so if we're talking about infrasound as a complaint, for example, still, there's 3 people, he said, in the United States that can do those measurements. And so then we would have to get one of those 3 people to my house, and they would have to do internal, external infrasound measurements and determine what the levels are, and then it would become a legal issue. And I wonder who, is responsible for whatever transpires from the legal issue.
It would become a compliance issue. Okay, is that not correct, Dennis?
As far as the number of people who can actually measure infrasound, I'm going to speak to it as a business person, all right? Right now, there is not an ordinance in the entire United States that has a component of infrasound. Greenwood would be the first ordinance in the entire United States to have an infrasound component. If infrasound, whether it's adopted by the state or others, becomes components of more and more ordinances, and somebody can make money at it, you're going to see more and more people. The equipment, as told us by Mike DeFerrier, it's $3,000 for this machine to measure infrasound. So if you don't have that many people, you can probably make your money back in one measurement.
He does
so,
that. So
yes, he
if I
does.
can just reply to that real quick. You're suggesting money could be made in the future off of the need to measure infrasound because of complaints from ordinances, but that confuses me a little bit because I'm talking about my complaint, in just a matter of time, that is a real complaint and not able to navigate back to who we actually legally go to about this complaint, first one of its kind. So if ordinances are going to start looking at infrasound more carefully, which perhaps they should based on the data that's now being demonstrated about how it impacts the physiology of not just husbands, wives, and daughters, but also pets, other animals that are impacted by these things. And we're starting to understand it better. So let's say that it does become a big thing and someday you can make money off it. The good, bad, the value of that, I don't know. All I know is that we need to figure out how we're going to handle our case. So I'm not sure how I do that yet here.
From reading this, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, where does it go after it's acknowledged and measured?
Okay,
and the measurements do show that it's, okay, so then
it comes back to an enforcement issue. If the measurements show that the CWEF is exceeding those infrasound levels, then it becomes an enforcement issue.
The town may convene a meeting with the town, the owner-operator, and the person filing the inquiry and/or complaint to attempt to reach a resolution if such actions as identified in 3A and 4AC have not resolved the complaint. If such a meeting is convened, it shall be held within 45 days of the receipt of the original public inquiry or complaint by the town. Right? So you would have to come and meet with the company and...
Thank you.
The planning board, is that who, or was there a
No.
Just to clarify for everybody.
Yeah. Planning board's responsibilities are done whenever an application is completed. That's when the planning board's duties are.
So it's the enforcement?
So it's the enforcement.
Okay.
Dr. Glass.
So just a quick follow-up question in terms of enforcement. Does the town have the ability to just turn these things off? So say the company argues that, oh, it's not really infrasound, it's not really a problem. Can the town just step in and say, no, turn them off? Or is that in here somewhere?
If the company is going to be a cooperative company, then they would turn them off anyway.
But what if they're not a cooperative company?
And if they're not a cooperative company, then yes, the town should have the ability to do that.
Is that in this document?
And it is not. It's probably not written in this document, but they certainly could tell the town, because the town has the ability, remember this, Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong here as the planning board chair, the town has the ability to pull the permit.
And
Okay? They can pull the permit.
that means that they have.
They have to
somebody
stop.
can actually-
They have no choice, they have to stop until the resolution of why we pulled the permit is taken care of. That's a legal issue.
Yeah. I'm going to correct you. I just was talking to Joel,
Okay.
our code enforcement officer. The only time a planning board could pull a permit, apply a cease and desist order or anything else like that is when any project is under construction.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. While it's under construction. That's the only, that's as far as what the planning board can do. Now, what the town can do would probably take a lot of legal money, right? So it would take a court order. It would take a court order for a cease and desist. Jill.
So what I'm hearing, I guess, is that we have 3 days, I make a complaint, in 3 days the company is supposed to respond to me. Then I think it was 45 days before they have to come to a resolution, so now it's already been a month and a half, and I'm still dealing with all this, and nobody has any power to shut them down. Is that correct?
There's nobody within the town to shut it down, correct. That's right. But in section D, which is before the 45 days, it says, if the town, within 14 days of the actions provided in sections 3A and 4B, determines that the complaint is without merit, it will be dismissed. If they determine it's with merit, which will be by measurements by whoever's, whether they're measuring for audible sound, infrasound, or whatever case may be, then if it's found within merit, then enforcement action can be taken.
Oh, and that was my other question. Who is the enforcement?
Our
What-
code enforcement officer.
So,
I will enforce whatever gets passed by the town.
But you're not able to shut them down?
No.
Not without my attorney, or the town's attorney.
So that could be months and months. So I
No,
could be here
no,
with
no,
my
no.
3 days, and then my 45 days, and then it could be months of court orders before anything happens.
We follow
They're in
procedure.
violation though, right?
If they're in violation, then Joel can issue a cease and desist.
I want to explain something really quick, because when we started writing this section, I started calling towns and trying to find out if there were complaints. So I started researching the complaint process. And what I found was that in most cases, the complaints are filed directly with the wind companies, and then the wind companies are not required to release those complaints. So they were under no requirement to release complaint records to me. So I called the DEP and I called the state and I requested complaints, and it was this whole process that was almost insurmountable without legal assistance to even get the complaint records through the DEP from these turbines. So what we did was we made it so that if there were complaints, it had to go directly to the town and be recorded and be available on the internet. So if anyone was ever researching complaints and how windmills actually affect people, they could find the information, because otherwise you're out in the dark looking for something and there's no record. The one exception to that I found was in Woodstock. You can go right on their webpage and it has all the lists of complaints that have been registered with Woodstock. And I highly suggest that all of you do that, because it's really good firsthand account of what's been going on with our neighbors. I don't know, yeah, I guess that's it.
Okay. Which is why, once the complaint is filed with the town, it becomes a matter of public record. So there's no ability to hide, because it's a matter of public record. Does that answer your question?
Chris Powers again. Isn't it true that if we don't pass this ordinance, then the complaint mechanism stays as it is with the existing ordinance, and those towers can be whatever height they want to put up? So one way or the other, we're better off having an ordinance to protect us rather than be exposed to that, no matter what the complaint procedure is.
Dennis?
I'm sorry.
Robert Moulton, Hanover, Maine. I have a property here in Greenwood that I'm thinking about building on. I can speak, I also had a property up until 2 weeks ago on the Concord Pond in Woodstock. And I can speak specifically to the complaint arrangement that they have. I filed a complaint. I called, they gave us a hotline, called, no answer, left a message. Quite a while later, called again, no answer, left a message. After calling the main office down in Massachusetts,
they acknowledged that their phone was out of service and that they had issued a new number, unbeknownst to anyone else. They then said they would get back to me. They would send somebody out acoustically. This was a noise complaint. The acoustic individual came down to test, set up the equipment, remained on the property, and they supposedly picked a day that the wind conditions were identical to the time that I made that phone call, according to their records that they didn't have. So they came in and they set up the equipment. They monitored it all day. I was there. There was no sound until 5 o'clock, which was the predominant time at which the air changes, and it's coming in off the lake. It goes out over the lake and starts rising, or falling. But anyway, at 5 o'clock, the noise started, and I was like, okay, here we are. And he goes, oh no, that's a jet going over. It's 5 o'clock, I have to go. He literally grabbed his equipment, threw it in his trunk, and was out of the yard in less than 4.5 minutes. He did not stay. The report came back probably, I don't remember exactly, but it was maybe a month later. The state agreed that there was no noise. He was there all day, and that there was nothing that they could do. The decibel levels were in. We made several calls after that, and nothing was ever done. Finish the process. Be careful.
Anybody else concerning that particular section? All right, let's.
Marie Martin, Greenwood. I know we have to vote yes to protect ourselves, but it seems to me that the residents, whether they're taxpayers or non-taxpayers, are the ones that have to go through all this hoorah and all these hoops. What is wrong here? Why do we have to go through all of this? We're calling this one, calling that one, this one doesn't answer. It's just horrible.
Sure. The way the committee tried to set this up is the complaint comes to the town. Okay. Then it is the 72 hours. The CWF has 72 hours to go from there, and then there's the schedule of days to go from there. So I'm not saying any system's perfect, but this is the best one that we could come up with.
We're punishing everybody else.
You're right, it's totally ridiculous that any machines would be installed on the top of the mountain that would hurt the residents.
Yeah, it says, but not limited to. A is the anticipated start date of decommissioning. B, anticipated completion date. C, methods of removal of all parts of the CWEF, including foundations, and how they will be disposed of. Areas and methods to restore disturbed land areas. Time periods, months to complete decommissioning, and cost for decommissioning based on section 1-701-3-S-4. This is copies of all permits from local, state, and/or federal agencies needed for decommissioning. Sir.
Dwight Mills, Greenwood, Maine. The talk about decommissioning, but isn't there a possibility that they may just trade the old tower out or the old equipment out and keep this thing going forever?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer. I don't know if that's technically possible. I get no way. Does anybody on the committee?
I don't even think we address that. But, so, that's, as the lady over here on the left said, it's something that would have to be considered for the
It's
future.
hard to imagine putting all that money up on those mountains and then walking away from it in 20 or 25 years.
Well, there's some precedent for doing that.
They've been doing it
They've
out
been doing
west
that for quite
forever.
some time, right.
Okay.
That's how much money's involved.
Exactly right.
Yes. Okay. Page. This is also under decommissioning on page 13. One of the in the current ordinance, you used to basically have a bond less the salvage value of the equipment. The salvage value of the equipment is now out. So it would be under the full cost of the decommissioning. On page 14, section 9, in the case of abandonment, the town shall utilize the decommissioning funds. This is where the bond comes in that they have to show, provide to the town, to decommission the CWF and take such actions as necessary. Can we open up a door? It's really getting warm. Is that possible?
Don't let the bugs in.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah,
Okay.
there you go.
Including court actions to secure the funds and to ensure completion of the decommissioning should the posted decommissioning fund not be sufficient to complete the decommissioning. Okay, so that's all new. That's it. That's a whole new section. The next section, which is also on page 14, which is under tower lighting. Okay, so this is all new also. There is new technology out there that's all approved by the FAA. It's been approved for within the last year, but the addition to that is all radar activated obstruction lighting systems shall be used on all towers, and all lighting of towers shall conform to the FAA administration standards. Basically what that means is that a plane, that blinking light or whatever it is that the FAA says lighting has to be on the tower is not on at all times. If there's a plane approaching the area, the light comes on. When the plane leaves the area, the light goes off. So that was a major addition to the plan. Anybody have any questions on that? Okay. This is all new also on page 15. Section 5, prior to the granting of any final approval, the applicant shall provide mitigation waivers that shall specify which provisions of setback, sound, and/or shadow flicker are waived by the participating property owners, that shall provide a legal description of the property subject to the waivers, and shall be recorded in the Oxford County Registry of Deeds, and subsequent deeds shall advise all latter owners that the property is so burdened. So if anybody allows a tower on their property, any waivers that they sign saying it's okay to exceed setbacks, noise levels, or whatnot, that has to be recorded at the registry of deed, and we'll follow that deed then thereon. And then the rest on page 15 and 16 are they're just definitions, is all they are, to the changes that have been made. And yes.
Daniel Twitchell Pond. How does that affect abutting property owners? If some property owners want to give waivers, what happens to the guy next door who's going to be impacted by more sound?
Right, so any abutting property owner, that's that participating and non-participating property line. So that's where the audible sound levels and the infrasound levels have to be at those levels at that property line.
Thank you.
Does that answer?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Jane.
Along the back page. On 14, on number 9, on the abandonment. In the case of the abandonment, the town should utilize the decommissioning funds to decommission the project.
Yep.
How do you know how much it's going to cost to decommission? How do you know how much of a bond you would have to require?
Sure.
And has there been any wind tower projects that have been decommissioned and you've gotten an idea of what that cost was?
So the way the committee has set this up and the way it's in the ordinance is that every 2 years, I think it is, every 2 years, an engineering firm will be retained. And that engineering firm will then come up with the cost for decommissioning as prescribed, which is recovering of the land, removing foundations, all of that. Everything that's encompassed into that engineering firm will then come up and say it's going to cost X dollars. Then it will be the CWEF that posts a bond for those dollars.
So it's possible that every 2 years, if this decommissioning goes up, they have to re-sign a new bond
Yes.
to cover the cost?
Yes.
If you read number 6, just above that, it explains all that right there, how that process goes.
Well, that doesn't tell me what that says if they don't complete it.
Correct.
Oh, sorry.
Town's gonna do it.
Correct. Yeah, but the financial resources are still there.
Dennis? But didn't you say before it was a percentage of that? Like,
No,
so
it's-
it's decreasing percentage?
It's not the way I remember it. Maybe that's what you remember, Larry.
I said it was a percentage, and it started off at around 100, and then it scaled down as the towers aged, et cetera. I think that's kind of like in the weeds, if you will, still. It's one of those things where the engineer is going to decide exactly what it's going to cost to put it back to what it was before they put the foundation in.
But if it's 10
So-
years into the project, they'll only be responsible for...
Jill, let me read this to you. Tyler just showed it to me on page 14, okay? The numbering is wrong, but anyway, it says,
Where are you reading?
on section 6, on page 14 near the top, the second paragraph. It says, estimates as described above shall be redone every 2 years on the anniversary of the granting of the CWEF permit and shall be submitted to the town upon acceptance of the revised estimates. Now, the town means the select board, okay? Estimates. They will issue a 2-year permit extension. The owner-operator of the CWEF shall be required to maintain decommissioning funds that are at least equal to the most recent estimate.
Okay, so it's not a percentage?
It's not a percentage.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. What's the current ordinance have to say about decommissioning and funds that need to be posted? In other words, if we don't pass this ordinance, what's the process? Okay, my question is, this proposed change to the ordinance protects us from making the post a bond in case these things go up and they need to come down. What's in the current ordinance that protects us from that?
It's what's in the DEP ordinance, I think.
So in other words, we're not really protected.
No. Until we
Well, I don't
pass
know
it.
what's in the DEP.
Okay.
I can't
All right.
address that.
It is not as complete as what we've done here.
The DEP ordinance is not as clear.
Thank you.
Dennis, you
Yes.
have a question here.
Harry,
I just have one simple question. What does the town get out of this, all of this that we're talking about? I think you're getting $1 million of your taxes or something. I mean, I just would like to know. There must be something because for the people around it.
there are figures, Harry, you can, and I don't mean to pass the buck, but get a hold of Kim, because there were figures, I don't have them with me, that were provided of what the taxable revenue will be from year 1 to year 20. You must have that. We've got that on record, because that was given during a public meeting here. I'm sorry, I don't have that.
I can just remember one thing that stood out to me that was said when they were talking about that, was that with the influx of funds from the Calpine, what they were saying they would be bringing into the town, and how that would trickle down to taxpayers is, for every $100,000 value of your home, you would get a $185 decrease in your tax bill.
That's it. But I want to follow up on that too,
I understand, but let's make sure we got hard and fast.
We got a question back. Go ahead, Beth.
Wait a minute. Go ahead.
Robert Molden, Woodstock, I'm over there where the towers were put in. I have my tax bill.
Please speak louder.
Taxes were $748. This year's taxes, $1,170. They went up approximately 50 to 55%. Over how many years? From 2014 to 2017. Now, the indication from the town was that the reason for the increase was because we had waterfront, and that the waterfront was being undertaxed. Now, first of all, I could agree with that if, first of all, the wind towers are supposed to come in and the taxes are going down, number one. Number two, if my taxes went up because I own waterfront, why didn't everyone else's taxes who didn't have waterfront, why didn't they go down and we meet in the middle? Because the town didn't need any more tax revenue. However, they got it. So why?
That all goes back to town budgeting and reevaluation and everything else. I mean, that's kind of a
50 to 55% in 3 years.
Yes, ma'am.
No. Really good about
About 13 windows. Greenwood's assessed valuation, because we become wealthier, will roughly go up, valuation-wise, $43 million. Now, because of this lovely new revenue and valuation, we're going to lose funding in state revenue sharing, because the richer the town is, the less money the state's going to give the town. Okay? So we're going to lose there. And then we're going to lose money because we have to pay more funding to the school, because that is based on valuation for the school. So then we're going to lose again, third time, we're going to lose to county taxes. Because again, on valuation, the richer Greenwood is, the less money we're going to be given. That's a known fact. So with all of this, you're going to be losing half of what Calpine or anybody else is going to say we're going to gain. We're going to lose half because all of these three fundings are going to go up. That doesn't include the loss of your property value, which some say you won't have, and some, like this gentleman said, you could. So remember, that's $43 million in assessed valuation. And the state is not going to give it to you two ways. You're not going to be richer, and they're not going to fund you at the same level. That just does not work. So you're going to lose over half of what you think this town is going to get. So is it going to be worth that kind of money to ruin our beautiful vistas here in Greenwood? And do you really think that tourists are going to come up, especially to look at windmills? I don't think so.
Jane, if it Jane, does it pertain to the amendment?
Pertains to what Marie was just talking about. And if, what Marie was just talking about, what triggered my mind is, there's a lot of retired people here in Lock Mills, Greenwood, that own property. They don't have kids in school. You saw what Nuri has gone through, complaining about paying $100,000 for a child. You could end up doing the same thing just by having these come in and having your taxes go down and the money that you get from the state revenue sharing. That's what happened to Nuri. It could happen here too, and you will be complaining because you'll be paying a lot more money for students going to school here.
Jane Roosberg, Twitchell. This pertains to the amendment on page 6, something you just kind of went over, Dennis. The actual construction time is 12 hours a day, and if you look at the decibels, it goes from 87 to 105. We had construction in my town in Massachusetts just on homes, and there were so many complaints about the number of hours of construction and the trucks and the noise that they had to actually limit the number of hours that the construction could go on. I'd like you to consider that.
Sir.
Thank you very much for going through piece by piece on this proposed ordinance. My only question would be now, have we reached the end of this portion of this public hearing?
Yes.
Then may I approach the podium?
Can I ask one question?
Okay, this is where
I am here to advocate for
Okay,
this
then
proposed
let's do this.
amendment.
I don't want to shut anybody off, but let's do this. To be in accordance with the rules of this meeting, okay? Let's adjourn the meeting part as pertains to the amendments to the ordinance. And
No.
if-
No, I object.
No,
Because it says
because
public comment.
part of this public hearing is to allow people in this town, whether they are a voter or not, to have public comments.
It's in the agenda, comment.
Public comments are
As
item
related to the
Item
amendments.
4, as related.
And he wants to make
That is
comments.
exactly why I want
It's in the
to
agenda.
He wants to advocate
utilize
for the
my
amendments.
5 minutes of public speaking.
Dennis, I have one question. Dennis, I have a question.
Yeah.
If in fact the ordinance does not pass,
Yes.
what happens then? Because I don't think we've ever been told. We go back to the town's original ordinance?
You have a meeting,
We
you can't.
do another
amend
ordinance
the
committee and do another ordinance? Or does the same
You gotta
ordinance
vote
committee
on
do
what
another
to-
ordinance?
Nothing's
What
gonna
are
change.
the options?
Okay, the way the process, that we've been under the assumption, the way the process is going to work, is this will now go to town vote. You can't hear me?
Yeah, use the mic.
Okay. The way it's been explained to the committee is, should these amendments not pass at town meeting, okay, the moratorium is still in place if these amendments do not pass. Then it will be up to the select board to decide where do they want to go with it.
Which could mean,
It could mean sending it back to the ordinance review committee for other revisions. It could mean that they just say, we're done. That's the way the process, and Mr. Jordan, if I'm incorrect, but that's the way the process has been explained to the ordinance review committee.
So everything is entirely up to the selectmen
After the vote.
after the vote?
After the vote.
If the vote does not pass?
If the vote does not pass. Then it becomes the select board issue. Is the way it's been
So
explained to me.
that really gives, that's pretty scary, because there are a lot of things that can happen that the town themselves would have no control over. Am I correct in assuming that?
No, the town, if these amendments do not pass, the existing ordinance is still in place, and the moratorium is still in place. So the moratorium basically means there cannot be any application made to the town while the moratorium is in place.
But the existing ordinance that would be in place would be a tower any height they wanted and 1.5 times the tower setback, correct? And 42 decibels during the day.
Correct.
Yeah, whatever's in the current
Whatever's
site
in the
plan
current
right now is
ordinance.
what we would revert back to.
So it would revert back to the state standards for sound. If there are no height restrictions, there are, it goes back to what's already in the town ordinance.
Which, when Calpine is offering us all this money, it kind of seems strange to me that what we're selling off is, I mean, it's not just selling off a mile or 2 miles from your properties, it's literally in your backyard, a 600-foot tower.
Yep.
Dwight Mills, Greenwood, Maine. On the day of the special town meeting, when the vote will be taken, will the public be allowed to make general comments or only comments like tonight, considering the exact language of the changes?
Mr. Jordan, you want to handle that one?
Well, I'm not sure. I would expect it would be open for discussion.
The last public hearing where there was contention going on, which was hillside ridgeline development, where there were going to be proposed restrictions that were put in place. So the way the public hearing went, or the way the vote went, prior to the vote, the moderator said, is there anybody who's going to change their mind by somebody speaking? Nobody raised their hand. They all had their minds made up. So the moderator said, can somebody make a motion to move the vote? And the motion was made and it passed and the vote was taken and we were out of there in no time. So it depends on, a lot of it will depend on the moderator, but
This ordinance cannot be amended.
the ordinance cannot be
It will
amended.
go to the people as it is.
As it is.
As it is.
So there can't be, at that time, there cannot be any amendments made. Somebody can't say, well, I vote to take out.
I'm not talking about amendments, I'm just talking about what you're talking about, trying to change somebody's mind about how to vote.
Yeah,
We've heard some already tonight.
yes, yeah. So in most special town meetings that, in fact, all special town meetings I've been involved with, there's always been public comment. I don't know of one I've ever been at that there hasn't been public comment.
Dennis?
Hi.
It was my understanding that at this hearing, it would be determined as to when the vote would be held?
No.
So,
No.
I'm sorry.
No, the select board, at the next, my impression is that this committee or the planning board, nobody makes the recommendation on when the vote is going to be taken. That will be up to the next select board meeting that they will, you have, I think, 30 days, Ken? 30 days, that the select board has to take action on when the vote will be held. It doesn't mean that the vote has to be held within 30 days of tonight. They have 30 days to make that decision on when they're going to hold the vote.
And how is that announced to the public when the vote will be?
That, well,
It'll have to be advertised.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And there's a window that it has to be advertised before the vote. What is it, Kim?
2 weeks.
2
2
weeks.
weeks. 2 weeks.
So we have no idea when the vote is going to be at this point?
Right.
Not tonight.
Okay, we just vote right now.
Behind you.
Yeah.
Dennis?
What?
You got
Just
one
a
more?
question, two out there, two out
Is it
there.
a question concerning?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Mark Moore, Irish Neighborhood Road.
Yep.
Why was 250 maximum height decided on?
That was a motion that was made by one of the committee members.
Could it have been 0 height? I mean, could the town have said we
No.
don't want windows?
No. On advice of the town attorney, the answer to that would be no, because you can't
Yeah, but we said,
prohibit.
DEP said straight out, we could ban it if we want to. Mark Bergeron stood right in here and said we could ban them if we want to. I know what the lawyer said, but the guy who.
And again, the amendments are here, these are what's going to be voted on. That was just.
Okay, I was just curious.
Sure,
why-
sure, okay. Jane?
I know when we did this in Bethel, and we put a moratorium on it at our town meeting, we had a lawyer stand up and say you need to pass the ordinance. Because if you try to put a moratorium on something, the state can still allow them to come in and do a permit. Is that correct?
No.
But in looking this up under the publicradio.org, it says, it used to be that communities could order a moratorium, put wind projects on hold, or try to ban them altogether. But in 2011, the legislature approved a new rule that gives state officials the final say over where it's okay to put a large-scale wind farm instead of a local government. That's why your ordinance is important, because if you don't have an ordinance in place, even with a moratorium, I believe they can still come in because they can get a permit from the state.
After going through the state route. Anyway, Norm?
Thank you. My name is Norman Milliard, and I am here to strongly advocate for the approval of this ordinance relating to commercial wind energy facilities. I would first like to thank the individual voters that volunteered over a year ago to work on the site plan review ordinance. I attended as many meetings as I could. and I have nothing but respect for those who have worked so diligently on this. It has been at times tedious and difficult work. It has not always been unanimous, but it has been civil and respectful. I have been a voter in this great town since 1990. Like many in this room, I chose to come and live in Greenwood. For the first 3 years, I commuted to Lewiston to work as a letter carrier for the United States Postal Service. In 1993, I was promoted and became the postmaster of Bethel, another great town near here. I retired from that position in 2009. I continue to choose to live in Greenwood because I cannot imagine living anywhere else. Our friends from Texas, Calpine, want to build in your backyard a commercial wind energy facility. This facility would include 13 commercial industrial wind turbines that are 600 feet tall. One of the premier symbols of the founding of this great country is the Washington Monument in our nation's capital. The Washington Monument is 555 feet tall. Our friends from Texas, Calpine, want to build on your precious mountains 13 commercial industrial wind turbines that are taller than the premier symbol of this great country, the Washington Monument. Each turbine has 3 blades. A single blade is 246 feet long. A Boeing 747 jumbo jet is 232 feet long and carries 416 passengers. In 1998, the town of Greenwood was at a crossroads. We had to determine how to best handle the incessant, high-pitched audio pollution created by jet skis. The voters decided overwhelmingly to regulate the usage of these machines on our ponds. In 1989, of what the town of Greenwood will be like in the next 20 years. We will never see our friends from Texas again. But you will always remember them and what they will have done to your town.
That's right.
If a rural quality of life, wondrous ponds, and gorgeous mountain views are more valuable to you than the money that our friends from Texas are attempting to bribe you with,
That's right.
then you must vote yes to approve this revised ordinance. Thank you.
I don't think anybody's going to adopt that, so we can have a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.